We welcome you to another Sunday School lesson. Sunday School is a blessing and gift from God. The great principle we see from our lesson is that you are to let God's past faithfulness give you courage in times of present trouble. God's past acts of faithfulness to you should assure you that He will take care of you when you face future times of trouble. God's past faithfulness should give you confidence for God's faithfulness in the future. That is the principle that David used as he prepared to face Goliath. It is what you and I are to use as well. One of the things that the Bible teaches us is that you should have great faith in God. Weak faith is something that renders you ineffective in serving Jesus. Jesus often criticized his disciples for their lack of faith. Our first verse says, "What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him." It wasn't as if David's words were all that bold. He never was noisy or said, "If I went out to fight against that Philistine, I would whip his tail." He's nothing. David didn't talk like that, but at least he stood up to Goliath. David spoke words of faith and courage, which stood out from among all the words of fear and cowardice spoken by the men of Israel. David's words brought encouragement and hope to those who heard them and were ultimately mentioned to Saul, so he sent for David. Verse 32 says, "David said to Saul, 'Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine, your servant will go and fight him.'" Saul waited a long time, at least 40 days, to hear someone say these words. But to hear them now, from the mouth of this boy, almost seemed like a cruel joke. The good news is that someone finally wants to fight Goliath. The bad news is that he is a little shepherd boy. David's words to Saul almost made the matter worse. "Let no one lose heart because of him" almost sounds like, "All right everyone, calm down, I've got the situation completely under control." It seemed ridiculous coming from this teenage boy. It seemed like youthful pride and overconfidence, but it wasn't. "Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine," these are bold words. This is the first time David specifically volunteered to battle against Goliath. It is one thing to say, someone should do something about the enemy. It is entirely another thing to say, I will do something about the enemy. Verse 33 says, "Saul replied, 'You are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him, you are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth.'" Saul thought David was disqualified because of his age, size, and inexperience. This shows that Saul looked at the battle purely in natural, outward terms. The outward tale of the tape said there was no way David could win. The tale of God's tape said there was no way David could lose. Saul essentially told David, "He's been a soldier longer than you have been alive. How can you ever defeat him?" Again, this shows that Saul only looked at the outward, not the spiritual dimensions of this battle. Verse 34 says, "But David said to Saul, 'Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep.' When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from the flock. God prepared David for this exact battle when David was a lowly shepherd. A lion attacked the lambs and David fought the lion. A bear came against the sheep and David battled with the bear. All along, God prepared David to fight Goliath. How long did David prepare to fight Goliath? All his life, up to that day. David testifies of God's faithfulness to him in giving him the skills to kill a lion and a bear. Verse 35 says, "I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it and killed it." This is generally God's pattern for preparation. He calls us to be faithful right where we are and then uses our faithfulness to accomplish greater things. If David ran scared at the lion or the bear, he would never have been ready to fight Goliath now. But he was faithful then, so he will be faithful now. David is quite confident. It is in large part because of his faith in God, and God's Spirit upon him. But it is also due to his preparation and experience. Verse 36 says, "Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God." Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this will be like one of them. David increases in boldness as the story progresses. First, he said someone should fight Goliath because he has defied the armies of the living God. Then he said he would fight and kill Goliath, the uncircumcised Philistine. Verse 37 says, "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine." Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." As a shepherd facing lions and bears, David had no idea he was being trained to fight a giant. In the midst of our preparation we rarely see how God will use it. Yet now, David can look back and know that the same God who delivered him before, will also deliver him now. David knew that God's help in times past, is a prophecy of his help in the future. Convinced with David's decision and determination, Saul allows David into the battlefield with his blessings. Verse 45 says, "David said to the Philistine, 'You come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied.'" We can imagine Goliath's deep, bass voice reverberating against the tall hills surrounding the valley of Elah. The sound struck fear into the heart of every Israelite soldier. Then David shouted with his teenage voice, perhaps even with his voice cracking. The Philistines laughed when they heard David practically screaming in his cracking voice, and the Israelites were both horrified and embarrassed. "You come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied." David makes a contrast between himself and Goliath without giving credit to Goliath himself. To say, "I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts," is to say, I come as a representative of the Lord of hosts, the God who has heavenly armies at his command. I am a sent man, a man on a mission from God. Verse 48 says, "As the Philistine moved closer to attack him, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet him." When the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, David hurried and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. What a scene! Goliath, enraged at David's boldness, drew near to quickly kill David. David didn't run away. He didn't hide. He didn't panic. He didn't drop to his knees and pray. Instead, David hurried and ran, to meet the Philistine. Many Christians struggle at this very point. Is God supposed to do it, or am I supposed to do it? The answer is, yes. God does it and we do it. Trust God, rely on Him, and then get to work and work as hard as you can, run right at the enemy. That is how the work of God is done. Verse 49 says, "Reaching into his bag and taking out a stone, he slung it and struck the Philistine on the forehead." David got his stone, slung it and struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face. David had the calm hand and careful aim of someone who really trusted God. He used the sling, a leather strap with a pouch in the middle, to hurl a stone, killing Goliath. This battle was won while out with the sheep. In those lonely hours alone with the lambs, David talked to God and took a lot of target practice with his sling. Now his communion with the Lord and his skill with the sling are both used by God. Everyone else thought, "Goliath is so big, I can't beat him." David thought, "Goliath is so big, I can't miss him." A man of less faith might have been too nervous to take the proper aim. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face. Our final verse says, "So David triumphed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, without a sword in his hand he struck down the Philistine and killed him." So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword and drew it out of its sheath and killed him, and cut off his head with it. David made certain the enemy was dead. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. Now the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted, and pursued the Philistines as far as the entrance of the valley and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell along the road to Shaaraim, even as far as Gath and Ekron. Then the children of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their tents. And David took the head of the Philistine and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armor in his tent. The faith of David. A shepherd lad had more courage than all the mighty men of Israel. When David kept sheep, he proved himself very careful and tender of his flock. This reminds us of Christ, the Good Shepherd, who not only ventured, but laid down his life for the sheep. Our experience ought to encourage us to trust in God, and be bold in the way of duty. David had courage to fight the Philistine. Satisfied to go without armor, he fought and conquered in faith, prayer, truth, and righteousness. The whole armor of God, and the mind that was in Christ, are equally needful for all the servants of the Lord, whatever may be their work. The faith of David. 1. Defying God's own army is folly, 1 Samuel 17:36. Throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, the plans and programs of Yahweh will not be thwarted. It is folly to defy God. 2. David trusted the Lord to come to his aid, 1 Samuel 17:37. David bravely confronts Goliath based on his belief that God saves not by sword or spear. 3. Faith saves in the face of our own powerlessness, 1 Samuel 17:37. The victory over Goliath is the victory brought by God himself, which is a powerful call to remember that victory is not of ourselves but due to Christ, the one in whom we put our faith in. We are truly glad you spent time to learn this lesson with us. We hope you are blessed and may share these with somebody else. Thank you very much, have a great week, and God bless you always, dear brothers and sisters.